every variety and stripe. But I have to say, Mrs. Castor, you were in a class by yourself.
In September of 2007, a 19-year-old college student named Ashley Wallace was in her first days of school when two investigators showed up to speak with her. They had news about her father who had died years earlier, back when she was just 11. His death had been ruled natural, a heart attack. But now, the detectives told her something that turned her world upside down. Her father had not died naturally. He had been poisoned. Shaken and terrified, Ashley did what any daughter would do. She called her mother. Her mother, Stacey, was, in Ashley's words, not just her mom, but her best friend. Stacey comforted her and invited her over to the family home to have a drink together to process the awful day. Ashley went. Within about a day, Ashley Wallace was found unconscious in her bed, barely alive, a typed suicide note sitting on her nightstand. In that note, Ashley appeared to confess to murdering her own father and her stepfather too. It looked like a guilt-ridden young woman had tried to take her own life. But Ashley had not written that note. She had not tried to kill herself, and she had not murdered anyone. The person who typed that confession, the person who had just tried to poison her into silence, was the one person in the world she trusted most, her mother. This is the story of Stacey Castor, the woman the media would call the Black Widow, and one of the most chilling betrayals ever to reach an American courtroom, a mother willing to sacrifice her own daughter to save herself. Stay with me to the end. For years, Stacey Castor presented herself to the world as a woman who had simply suffered terrible, repeated misfortune. Stacey, born Stacey Daniels in 1967 in upstate New York, seemed, on the surface, like an ordinary wife and mother living an ordinary life near Syracuse. But her story, as she told it, was one of relentless tragedy. Her first husband, she said, had died of a heart attack, tragically young. Her second husband had, she claimed, poisoned himself in a fit of drunken depression. And later, she would say, even her own daughter had tried to take her own life. To anyone listening, Stacey Castor was a woman crushed under an unfair weight of loss, a survivor of one heartbreak after another. But that was the mask. Behind it, according to prosecutors and the 2-year investigation that eventually exposed her, almost none of it was as it appeared. The tragedies were not misfortune. They were murder, and Stacey Castor was not a grieving survivor. She was, in the words of the judge who eventually sentenced her, in a class all by herself. Her first husband was a man named Michael Wallace. They married and had 2 daughters, Ashley and Bree. In 2000, Michael died. He was only 38 years old. At the time, doctors ruled that he had suffered a heart attack. His young family mourned him. His daughters grew up believing their father had been taken by natural causes. There was no investigation, no autopsy that raised alarms. Michael Wallace was buried and the case was closed. For years, no one suspected a thing. And Stacey moved on. A few years after Michael's death, Stacey married again to a man named David Castor. David owned a business, and by marrying him, Stacey took his name, the name that would eventually become infamous. But this marriage, like the first, would end in death. In August of 2005, Stacey called emergency services with an alarming report. She said her husband David had locked himself in their bedroom and had not come out for around 24 hours. When paramedics arrived, Stacey asked them to break down the bedroom door. Behind it, they found a grim scene. David Castor was dead, stretched out on the bed, with a large amount of vomit around him. On the nightstand sat a glass filled with a green liquid, and under the bed, a container of antifreeze. At first glance, it looked like a suicide, a troubled man locked away who had swallowed antifreeze to end his life. And initially, that is exactly how David Castor's death was treated, as a self-inflicted tragedy. His death was ruled a suicide. But something about the scene didn't sit right with one investigator. There was a detective named Dominic Spinelli who looked at the evidence and felt a growing sense of doubt. The details were off, and as he examined the case more closely, a troubling question formed. Was it really possible that David Castor had knowingly poisoned himself? Or had someone else administered that antifreeze and staged the scene to look like suicide? That single detective's skepticism would launch an investigation that lasted 2 years and would eventually unravel not one murder, but a pattern of them. To understand this case, you have to understand the weapon Stacey Castor chose: antifreeze. The toxic ingredient in antifreeze is a chemical called ethylene glycol, and it is a horrifyingly effective poison for a killer who wants to avoid detection. It has a sweet taste, which makes it easy to slip into a drink without the victim noticing. Once ingested, it attacks the body's vital organs, causing the kidneys and other systems to shut down over a number of hours. To an untrained eye or an unsuspecting doctor, the resulting death can look like something else entirely, like organ failure or a heart attack. But ethylene glycol leaves a signature. As the body processes the poison, it produces tiny crystals, calcium oxalate crystals, that lodge in the organs, particularly the kidneys. And remarkably, these crystals do not break down quickly. They can persist in the body for years, even after death, even after burial. This scientific fact would become the key that unlocked the entire case. As Detective Spinelli dug into David Castor's death, he grew convinced it was not suicide. And then he learned something that changed everything. He discovered that Stacey's first husband, Michael Wallace, had also died young years earlier. 2 husbands, both dead, both relatively young. To an investigator, that was a pattern too striking to ignore. Spinelli reached out to authorities in the neighboring county where Michael Wallace's death had occurred and noted the similarities. And so investigators made a decision that would prove decisive. They exhumed the body of Michael Wallace, Stacey's first husband, the man who had supposedly died of a heart attack back in 2000. They examined his organs looking for those telltale crystals, and they found them. Michael Wallace, it turned out, had not died of a heart attack at all. He had died of antifreeze poisoning. His death was reclassified as a homicide. 2 husbands, 2 antifreeze deaths, one common denominator: Stacey Castor. By September of 2007, the investigation had gathered serious momentum, and Stacey Castor could feel the ground shifting beneath her. Investigators had exhumed Michael Wallace and found the antifreeze. They were building a case that both of Stacey's husbands had been murdered the same way. The financial motive was becoming clear too. Prosecutors would argue that Stacey killed her husbands to collect on their life insurance policies and their estates. In David Castor's will, everything had been left to Stacey and her 2 daughters, and nothing to David's own son, a will that would later be revealed as a forgery, faked by Stacey herself. Stacey knew the walls were closing in, and it was at this moment, cornered and desperate, that she conceived a plan so cold it stunned even veteran investigators. If the police were looking for the person who poisoned 2 men with antifreeze, then Stacey would give them someone. She would give them a culprit who would confess, and who would never be able to defend herself. She would give them her own daughter, Ashley. The plan required Ashley to appear to have killed herself out of guilt, leaving behind a confession. On Ashley's first days of college, the investigators came to question her about her father's poisoning. Distraught, Ashley called her mother. And Stacey, playing the comforting best friend, invited her daughter home for a drink to cope with the terrible day. What Ashley didn't know was that police had begun watching Stacey's house and had even wiretapped her phone. On those recordings, investigators could hear Stacey questioning Ashley about exactly what she had told the detectives, and then suggesting they get together for that drink because they'd both had such a hard day. Over a roughly 17-hour period, prosecutors would later say, Stacey Castor tried to murder her own child. The first drink Ashley described as nasty tasting. According to the prosecution, Stacey knocked her daughter out with sleeping pills, and then, using a spoon, fed the semi-conscious young woman a mixture of vodka and crushed prescription pills over those long hours. A slow, deliberate poisoning designed to look like a suicide attempt or overdose. And while her daughter lay dying in a bedroom, Stacey sat at the family computer and composed a suicide note. It was around 750 words long. Written as though it were Ashley speaking, it confessed to murdering her father Michael and her stepfather David. It was meant to be the final piece, a dead daughter, a written confession, and Stacey Castor walking away, the grieving mother, forever cleared of suspicion. But the plan failed because of Ashley's younger sister. In the early morning, Ashley's little sister, Bree, found Ashley unconscious in her bed and could not wake her. Bree, alarmed, demanded that they get help, and it was only then that Stacey made the 911 call, reporting that her daughter was unresponsive. Ashley Wallace was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, and against the odds, she survived. The poisoning that was meant to silence her forever had not killed her, and when she recovered, she was able to tell the truth. She had not written any suicide note, she had not tried to kill herself, and she certainly had not murdered her father or her stepfather. She had gone to her mother's home for a drink and woken up in a hospital. The frame job had collapsed, and now investigators turned their full attention to the woman who had built it. The evidence against Stacey Castor, once assembled, was overwhelming. Start with that suicide note. Investigators examined the family computer, and what they found was damning. The note, supposedly written by Ashley in her final desperate hours, had actually been composed on the home computer, and there were multiple drafts of it. Stacey had written and revised her daughter's confession. A genuine suicide note is not something the victim writes several drafts of on a shared family computer. This was a document that had been carefully authored by someone else, and the digital trail led straight to Stacey. Then there was the physical evidence from David Castor's death. Investigators found Stacey's fingerprints on the glass of antifreeze that had been sitting by his bed, the supposed instrument of his suicide. And in the trash, they found a turkey baster, a common kitchen tool, with traces of antifreeze inside it. Prosecutors would argue this was how Stacey administered the poison, using the baster to force the antifreeze into her husband. These were not the artifacts of a suicide. They were the tools and traces of a murder, staged. And behind it all lay the pattern. Two husbands, both dead of the exact same rare poison, a forged will, wiretapped phone calls, and a daughter who had survived to tell the world what her mother had done. The press had already given Stacey Castor a nickname that captured the horror of it. They called her the Black Widow, after the spider that kills its mates. Stacey Castor's trial began in January of 2009, and it drew national attention. The case had everything: poison, betrayal, a forged confession, and the almost unimaginable spectacle of a mother accused of trying to murder her own daughter to escape justice. The trial featured a wrenching confrontation. Both Ashley Wallace and Stacey Castor took the witness stand, a daughter and a mother in the same courtroom, on opposite sides of an accusation of attempted murder. The prosecutor, District Attorney William Fitzpatrick, subjected Stacey to a blistering cross-examination, confronting her with the wiretapped phone calls and the computer evidence proving she had authored her daughter's supposed suicide note in multiple drafts. Stacey's defense tried to turn the accusation around. They argued that Ashley herself had written the suicide note, that Ashley was the real killer, and they speculated that the young woman had struggled with mental health problems. But they offered no real proof, and it collided with an impossible fact. Ashley had been only 11 years old when her father, Michael Wallace, died. The idea that a child had orchestrated an antifreeze poisoning strained all belief. The jury deliberated for 4 days, and on February 5, 2009, they delivered their verdict. Stacey Castor was found guilty of the second-degree murder of her husband David Castor. She was found guilty of the attempted murder of her daughter, Ashley Wallace, and she was found guilty of forging David Castor's will. At sentencing, Judge Joseph Fahey did not hold back. He told her that in his 34 years in the criminal justice system, having seen serial killers and contract killers of every kind, He had never encountered a parent willing to sacrifice their own child to shift blame away from themselves. He said she was in a class all by herself. He sentenced Stacey Castor to more than 50 years in prison, 51 years to life, ensuring she would never be free. Because the conviction was so complete, prosecutors saw no need to separately try her for the murder of her first husband, Michael Wallace, though the evidence of that killing had been presented at trial. She was never formally convicted of that murder, but few doubted the pattern. Stacey Castor never admitted to any of it. To the very end, she insisted she was innocent. She stated flatly that she did not kill Michael Wallace, did not kill David Castor, and did not try to kill her daughter, and that she would never say otherwise. Remarkably, a few people continued to believe her. Her own mother maintained Stacey's innocence, and instead pointed the finger at Ashley, the granddaughter, as the true killer, an accusation that ignored the fact that Ashley had been a young child at the time of the first death. Some extended family members also clung to doubt. But the evidence, the crystals in 2 exhumed bodies, the fingerprints, the turkey baster, the drafts of the forged suicide note, the wiretaps, told a story that juries and courts found conclusive. For Ashley Wallace, the daughter who survived, the aftermath was a lifetime of almost incomprehensible grief. She had lost her father to murder as a child. She had lost her stepfather the same way. And she had nearly lost her own life at the hands of the mother she called her best friend, a mother who had been willing to kill her and brand her a murderer to save herself. In interviews afterward, Ashley spoke of the impossible pain of it. Her mother, she said, had been her best friend, and then had taken all of that away. She said she would have done anything for her mother, but that her mother had decided she wanted to kill her instead. Stacey Castor's story came to its own end in June of 2016. She was found dead in her prison cell, having suffered a heart attack. She was 48 years old. She died as she had lived in her final years, insisting on her innocence, never once admitting what she had done to the men she married, or to the daughter she had tried to destroy. The case of the Black Widow endures because it violates something we believe to be almost sacred, the bond between a mother and her child. We can, with difficulty, comprehend a person who kills for money or out of rage or jealousy. But a mother who would calmly poison her own daughter over 17 hours and type out a false confession in the girl's name while she lay dying in the next room, all to avoid prison, that is a darkness that is genuinely hard to look at. But in the end, this is not really Stacey Castor's story. It belongs to the people she harmed, to David Castor and to Michael Wallace, 2 men who married her and trusted her, and who died slow, agonizing deaths from a poison slipped into their drinks. And above all, it belongs to Ashley Wallace, who lost her father, her stepfather, and every ounce of trust she had ever placed in her mother, and who nonetheless survived, and found the strength to stand in a courtroom and speak the truth about the person she had loved most in the world. Ashley lived, and because she lived, the truth came out. That is the one measure of light in an otherwise very dark story. This is the story of David Castor, Michael Wallace, and the daughter who survived, Ashley. May the men rest in peace, and may Ashley have found some peace of her own.